The massive training facility buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of young alien cadets lined up in perfect rows. Representatives from 12 different species stood before them, each wearing the distinctive uniform of their respective training academies. The Zephyrians with their crystalline skin gleamed under the artificial lights. The Corathans towered above everyone else, their forearms crossed in military precision. The Veloxians moved with liquid grace, their scaled bodies rippling with each breath. At the far end of the line stood Marcus Chen, the only human representative present. His simple black uniform looked plain compared to the elaborate ceremonial dress of the other trainers. Several alien dignitaries whispered among themselves, pointing at the human with barely concealed amusement. The Galactic Council had insisted on including Earth's military academy in this year's selection process. Despite many protests from the established powers, Commander Vextar of the Karathan Empire stepped forward, his voice booming across the hall. Today, young warriors, you choose your path. Each trainer here represents a different philosophy of combat and strategy. Choose wisely, for this decision will shape your entire military career. The selection process was simple. Each cadet would walk down the line of trainers and stop in front of the one they wished to learn from. Most observers expected the usual distribution. The stronger species would gravitate toward the Corathans, the quick ones toward the Veloxians, and the technical-minded toward the Zephyrians. Nobody expected much interest in the human trainer. The first cadet, a young Thrakari with bronze scales, began the walk. His reptilian eyes scanned each trainer carefully. When he reached Marcus, he stopped. The human looked down at the small alien maybe half his height and offered a simple nod. The Thrakari stepped forward and stood behind Marcus. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A Thrakari choosing a human trainer was unusual but not unprecedented. Perhaps the young one was confused about the process. The second cadet, a Veloxian female with silver markings, made her way down the line. She paused briefly at her own species trainer, then continued walking until she reached Marcus. Without hesitation, she joined the Thrakari behind the human. The whispers grew louder. 2 cadets choosing the human was unexpected, but still within the realm of possibility. Then the third cadet, a massive young Corathan nearly as tall as his adult trainer, walked past his own species representative and stopped in front of Marcus. The hall fell silent. Corathans never chose outside trainers. Their military traditions went back thousands of years, and loyalty to their own kind was considered sacred. Commander Vextar's 4 eyes widened in shock. Cadet Thrognak, are you certain of your choice? The young Corathan's voice was steady despite his obvious nervousness. Yes, Commander. I choose the human trainer. As Thrognak took his place behind Marcus, the human remained perfectly calm. He hadn't said a word during the entire process, hadn't made any grand speeches or demonstrations like some of the other trainers. He simply stood there watching each cadet with quiet attention. The 4th cadet approached. This time it was a Zephyrian, her crystalline body chiming softly as she moved. The Zephyrian trainer extended one of her many appendages in welcome, confident that the young one would choose her own kind. Instead, the cadet walked past and joined the growing group behind Marcus. By the 10th cadet, panic had set in among the alien trainers. Every single young warrior had chosen the human. The Corathan commander was pacing back and forth, his massive frame radiating frustration. The Veloxian trainer's scales had shifted to a deep red color, indicating extreme agitation. Even the usually calm Zephyrian was vibrating at a frequency that made the air itself hum with tension. This is unprecedented, hissed the Saurian representative, her forked tongue flicking out nervously. There must be some mistake. Perhaps the human has used some form of mental manipulation. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. I haven't spoken to any of these cadets before today. I've made no promises, offered no incentives. They're making their choices freely. The 20th cadet, a small Pixari with large black eyes, trembled as she walked down the line. The pressure from the alien trainers was palpable. Several of them stepped forward slightly, trying to appear more welcoming. The Corathan commander even managed what might have been a smile, though it looked more like a grimace on his fearsome features. The Pixari stopped in front of the Zephyrian trainer, and for a moment, hope flickered in the crystalline being's many eyes. Then the small cadet looked up at Marcus, who was still standing calmly at the end of the line. Without a word, she scurried over to join the others behind him. As the selection continued, the pattern never broke. Cadet after cadet, representing every species present, chose the human trainer. Some of the alien representatives began demanding explanations. Others accused Marcus of cheating somehow. A few suggested that the entire selection process should be started over. Through it all, Marcus remained silent and composed. He didn't gloat or make speeches about human superiority. He simply accepted each cadet with a brief nod and watched as the line grew longer behind him. When the last cadet, a nervous young Aquarian with translucent blue skin, made the same choice as all the others, the hall erupted in chaos. Alien dignitaries shouted at each other in a dozen different languages. Some demanded investigations. Others called for Marcus to be disqualified immediately. Commander Vextar's voice cut through the noise like a plasma blade. "Silence!" The hall fell quiet instantly. The Corathan leader's four eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression that mixed respect with deep suspicion. "Human, you have won every cadet. This has never happened in the 300-year history of the selection process. By law, they are yours to train." Marcus stepped forward slightly, his hands clasped behind his back. "I accept the responsibility, Commander. These cadets will receive the best training I can provide." "See that they do," Vextar growled. "The eyes of the galaxy will be watching. If these young warriors fail in their duties, the blame will fall on Earth and humanity." As the crowd began to disperse, many of the alien trainers shot dark looks at Marcus and his new students. Some muttered threats under their breath. Others simply shook their heads in bewilderment. Marcus finally turned to address his cadets for the first time. 200 young aliens from 12 different species looked up at him with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. They had chosen him for reasons they couldn't fully explain, driven by an instinct that told them this quiet human was exactly what they needed. "Tomorrow we begin," Marcus said simply. "Rest well tonight. You'll need it." The training ground was a massive complex that could simulate any environment in the known galaxy. As the 200 cadets gathered at dawn, they found Marcus already waiting for them. He wore simple workout clothes instead of his formal uniform, and his equipment consisted of nothing more than a basic datapad and a bottle of water. The cadets had expected to find elaborate training machines, holographic combat simulators, or at least some kind of weapons. Instead, they saw an empty field with nothing but grass and a few scattered obstacles. "Where are the training devices?" asked Thrognak, the young Corathan. His species was used to high-tech military equipment from day one of training. Marcus looked at the group assembled before him. Corathan stood next to tiny Pixari, Aquarians with their water-breathing apparatus mingled with desert-dwelling saurians. Each species had different strengths, different weaknesses, and different expectations about what military training should look like. "Before we use any technology, we need to understand ourselves," Marcus said. "Form a circle, everyone. Sit down." The request caused immediate confusion. Military training was supposed to involve running, fighting, and learning weapons. Sitting in circles was something children did in school. A Zephyrian cadet named Krista chimed nervously. "Trainer Marcus, shouldn't we begin with physical conditioning? Or perhaps weapons familiarization?" "We'll get to that," Marcus replied calmly. "But first I want each of you to tell me why you chose me yesterday." The circle formed slowly, with cadets looking uncertain. The Corathans towered over everyone, even while sitting. The Aquarians had to adjust their breathing gear. The Pixari seemed tiny compared to their larger classmates. Thrognak spoke first, his deep voice carrying across the circle. "I chose you because you didn't try to convince me. Every other trainer was posturing, showing off their strength or their technology. You just stood there and let us decide for ourselves." The Veloxian cadet, who had introduced herself as Zara, nodded in agreement. "My species values quick decisions and fast movement. But you showed patience. You waited while others rushed." One by one, each cadet shared their reasoning. The Pixari had chosen Marcus because he was the only trainer who had looked at each cadet individually, instead of scanning the group as a whole. The Saurians respected that he hadn't made grand promises about glory and conquest. The Aquarians appreciated that he hadn't treated their breathing apparatus as a weakness to be overcome. Marcus listened to every response without interrupting. When the last cadet finished speaking, he was quiet for a long moment. "You've all given different reasons, but there's a common thread," he said finally. "You chose me because I treated you as individuals rather than as representatives of your species. That's the first lesson in human military philosophy. Every soldier is unique with their own strengths and their own role to play. He stood up and gestured to the diverse group around him. Other training academies try to force everyone into the same mold. They want Korathan cadets to fight like Korathans, Veloxian cadets to fight like Veloxians, but I want you to fight like yourselves. The cadets exchanged glances. This was already different from anything they had expected. Now, Marcus continued, I want you to pair up. Not with your own species, mix it up. I want a Korathan with a Pixari, a Veloxian with a Zephyrian. Find someone as different from you as possible. The pairing process was awkward at first. The massive Thrognak looked down at his tiny Pixari partner with obvious confusion. How could they possibly train together when there was such a size difference? Your assignment is simple, Marcus announced once everyone was paired. Spend the next hour learning about your partner. Not about their species, about them personally. What do they fear? What makes them angry? What do they dream about when they sleep? A Saurian cadet raised her scaled hand. How does this relate to military training, sir? Marcus smiled for the first time since training began. In battle, you'll need to trust your fellow soldiers with your life. You can't trust someone you don't understand, and you can't understand someone if you only see them as a member of their species rather than as an individual. The conversations that followed were hesitant at first. Many of the cadets had never really talked to aliens from other species before. They knew the basic facts about each other's biology and culture, but they had never had personal conversations. Thrognak discovered that his Pixari partner, despite her small size, had dreams of becoming a starship commander. She wasn't content to stay in the background roles that her species typically filled. The Pixari learned that Thrognak had chosen military service not for glory, but because he wanted to protect others, a motivation that was considered unusual among his warrior species. Zara, the Veloxian, found herself paired with a methodical Zephyrian who approached every problem by breaking it down into logical components. At first, this frustrated Zara, who preferred quick, intuitive decisions. But as they talked, she began to see how his careful thinking could complement her rapid reactions. Marcus moved among the pairs, listening to conversations but not interfering. He watched as initial awkwardness gave way to genuine curiosity. He saw moments of surprise when cadets discovered that their assumptions about other species were wrong. He witnessed the first tentative bonds forming between beings who had seen each other as completely alien just hours before. After an hour, he called everyone back together. What did you learn? The responses came rapidly. Cadets had discovered that the supposedly emotionless Zephyrians actually felt things very deeply. The savage Korathans had complex philosophical beliefs about honor and duty. The timid Pixari possessed fierce determination beneath their small exteriors. This is why humans are effective warriors, Marcus explained. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest species in the galaxy, but we excel at forming bonds with others who are different from us. We can work with anyone, learn from anyone, and find strength in diversity. A young Aquarian raised her hand. But how does this help us in actual combat situations? Marcus pointed to Thrognak and his Pixari partner. Thrognak, if you were in battle and needed to send a message through a small tunnel that only she could fit through, would you trust her to deliver it accurately? The massive Korathan looked down at the tiny alien who had spent the last hour sharing her deepest aspirations with him. Yes, he said without hesitation. I would trust her completely. And that trust, Marcus said, is worth more than any weapon technology or advanced tactics. A squad that truly trusts each other can accomplish impossible things. As the first day of training ended, the cadets walked back to their dormitories in mixed groups instead of separating by species as they had the day before. Conversations continued as Korathans discussed philosophy with Zephyrians and Pixari, shared technical insights with Saurians. Marcus watched them go, making notes on his datapad. Other trainers focused on physical conditioning and weapons training from day one, but humans understood that the mind and heart were just as important as the body in creating effective soldiers. Tomorrow would bring physical challenges and tactical exercises. But today had established something more valuable than any combat skill, the foundation of genuine teamwork between the most diverse group of military cadets ever assembled. The alien trainers who had lost all their potential students were undoubtedly planning more traditional regimens for next year's selection. They would emphasize strength, speed, and technical proficiency. They would promise glory and advancement, but they would miss what Marcus understood instinctively: Wars were won not by superior individuals, but by superior teams. And the strongest teams were built on understanding, trust, and the unique contributions that each member could provide. 3 weeks into training, whispers began spreading through the military academy. Marcus's cadets weren't following any traditional training protocols. While other squads ran identical obstacle courses, his group spent time in meditation and discussion. While others practiced standard combat formations, his cadets worked in constantly changing mixed-species teams. The criticism reached its peak when Commander Vextar arrived for an unannounced inspection, accompanied by trainers from the other academies who had lost their students. They found Marcus's cadets sitting in a circle again, this time sharing combat experiences from their home worlds. "This is ridiculous," muttered the Veloxian trainer, her scales shifting to an angry orange. "They're treating military training like a therapy session." Commander Vextar's 4 eyes narrowed as he watched the group. "Trainer Chen, explain what you're doing." Marcus stood and faced the Karathan commander without showing any sign of nervousness. "We're conducting a tactical analysis session, sir. Each species has different approaches to combat based on their biology and culture. By sharing these approaches, we can develop hybrid strategies that are more effective than any single species doctrine. Combat analysis requires actual combat," growled the Karathan trainer who had lost Thrognak. "These cadets should be sparring, not talking." "I agree," Marcus said calmly, "which is why tomorrow we'll be conducting our first major physical assessment." The announcement caused immediate excitement among the cadets and skepticism among the observers. Marcus had spent weeks building trust and understanding, but he hadn't yet demonstrated whether his methods could produce actual warriors. The next morning, the entire academy gathered at the main training complex. Word had spread that the human trainer was finally going to put his cadets through real physical tests. Representatives from all 12 species came to watch, many expecting to see the humans' unconventional methods fail spectacularly. The test arena was a massive obstacle course that could be reconfigured for different challenges. It included climbing, walls, balance beams, combat zones, and puzzle sections that required both physical ability and mental agility. "Standard protocol," announced Commander Vextar, "is for each squad to complete the course as a unit. They are evaluated on their overall time and the performance of their weakest member." Marcus's cadets lined up at the starting line. They looked small and disorganized compared to the other squads present. The Karathan squad was a wall of identical muscle and armor. The Veloxian squad moved with fluid coordination. The Zephyrian squad hummed with precise technical efficiency. "You may begin when ready," the commander announced. The Karathan squad charged forward immediately, relying on brute strength to smash through obstacles. The Veloxians flowed around barriers like water. The Zephyrians analyzed each challenge methodically before proceeding. Marcus's squad did something completely different. They gathered in a tight huddle for 30 seconds, with urgent whispered conversations happening between different species. Then they broke apart and moved toward the course in a pattern that seemed chaotic to the observers. At the first obstacle, a 30-foot climbing wall, the traditional squads approached it as individuals. Each member climbed independently, with stronger members helping weaker ones only when necessary. Marcus's cadets immediately formed a living pyramid. The massive Karathan served as the base, with smaller species climbing on their shoulders. The tiny Pixari, who could never have climbed the wall alone, were lifted and thrown to the top by their larger teammates. Once there, they secured ropes and equipment for the others. "Inefficient," commented the Saurian trainer. "They're wasting time helping the weak ones." But when the times were calculated, Marcus's squad had completed the climbing section faster than any other group. By using their size differences as advantages rather than obstacles, they had found a more efficient path. The second obstacle was a maze filled with laser sensors that would eliminate anyone who triggered them. Traditional training taught stealth and individual navigation skills. Marcus's cadets sent the Aquarians ahead first. Their translucent skin and natural ability to move silently made them perfect scouts. They mapped the safe paths and communicated them back to the team using a mixture of hand signals and quiet clicks that each species could understand. Meanwhile, The Zephyrians used their natural precision to calculate optimal routes based on the Aquarian reports. The Veloxians, with their quick reflexes, served as point guards to catch anyone who might stumble into a sensor. The result was that Marcus's entire squad moved through the maze like a single organism, with each species contributing their natural abilities to the group's success. Observer aliens began murmuring with grudging respect. This wasn't just team cooperation. It was something entirely new. The third challenge was combat simulation. Holographic enemies appeared throughout an urban warfare environment, and squads had to eliminate all targets while protecting civilian simulations. Traditional squads assigned roles based on standard military doctrine: heavy assault troops, support gunners, reconnaissance specialists. Each member was expected to perform their designated function regardless of the specific situation. Marcus's cadets did something unprecedented. They changed roles constantly throughout the engagement. When the situation called for stealth, the naturally quiet Aquarians took point. When heavy firepower was needed, the strong Corathans moved to the front. When precision was required, the careful Zephyrians assumed leadership. More importantly, they communicated constantly. Instead of following pre-assigned battle plans, they adapted in real time based on input from every squad member. A Pixari spotting an enemy sniper could instantly redirect the entire team's strategy. A Saurian detecting a thermal signature could change the squad's approach to a building. The watching trainers fell silent as they realized what they were seeing. This wasn't just effective teamwork. It was a completely new form of military organization. Instead of trying to make aliens fight like their own species, Marcus had created a system where different species enhanced each other's natural abilities. When the final scores were announced, the results shocked everyone present. Marcus's mixed species squad hadn't just won. They had achieved the highest scores in Academy history. They had completed the course faster with fewer errors and with better tactical decision-making than any previous group. Commander Vextar approached Marcus as the cadets celebrated their victory. "How?" was all the Corathan leader asked. Marcus gestured toward his celebrating students. "Every other training system tries to eliminate differences between soldiers. They want everyone to fight the same way, think the same way, react the same way. But humans learned long ago that diversity is a strength, not a weakness." He pointed to Thrognak, who was congratulating his tiny Pixari partner. A Corathan fighting alongside other Corathans is just one Corathan multiplied, but a Corathan fighting alongside a Pixari, an Aquarian, and a Zephyrian becomes something greater than the sum of his parts. The Veloxian trainer who had been most critical stepped forward. "But this requires much more complex coordination. How do you prevent confusion and conflicting orders?" "By teaching them to trust each other completely," Marcus replied. "When you truly understand your teammates, not just their abilities, but who they are as individuals, coordination becomes instinctive. They don't need complex command structures because they can anticipate each other's actions." As the other squads filed past, several cadets from different species looked longingly at Marcus's celebrating group. They had trained with their own kind, following traditions thousands of years old, but they had never experienced the joy and effectiveness that came from true diversity, working in perfect harmony. That evening, Marcus received a message from Earth Command. Word of his squad's performance had already reached the highest levels of human military leadership. Similar mixed-species training programs were being planned for military academies throughout human space. But as Marcus watched his cadets sharing dinner together, Corathans helping Pixari reach high shelves, Aquarians explaining their technology, to curious Saurians, Zephyrians teaching meditation techniques to stressed Veloxians, he knew that what they had created here was about more than just military efficiency. They had proven that differences could be strengths, that understanding could overcome instinct, and that the future of galactic civilization might depend on learning to see beyond the boundaries of species and tradition. 6 weeks into training, the first real crisis erupted without warning. Marcus was conducting a tactical planning session when alarms began blaring throughout the academy. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as automated announcements echoed through the corridors. All training suspended. Academy lockdown in effect. This is not a drill. Through the massive viewports of the training facility, everyone could see what had triggered the emergency. A hostile fleet had emerged from hyperspace just outside the system's defensive perimeter. 12 massive warships hung in the darkness, their weapons charged and ready. The hostiles were a mysterious species that had appeared at the galaxy's edge 3 years ago. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, and didn't take prisoners. They simply attacked any vessel or installation they encountered with ruthless efficiency. Commander Vextar's voice crackled over the emergency communication system. All Academy personnel to battle stations. This facility is now under military command. Cadets will remain in their dormitories until further notice. Marcus looked at his 200 students, who had instinctively moved into defensive formations despite their fear. The mixed species groups they had formed over weeks of training stayed together, with larger aliens protectively surrounding smaller ones. "Sir," said Thrognak, his deep voice steady despite the circumstances. "Request permission to assist in the defense." Marcus shook his head. "You're still cadets. Your job is to survive this, not fight." But even as he spoke, reports were flooding in through the Academy's communication channels. The system's defense fleet was outnumbered and outgunned. 3 stations had already fallen to the hostile advance. The Academy itself would be under direct attack within hours. A new announcement came over the speakers, this time in Commander Vextar's personal voice. "All available personnel report to combat stations immediately. Academy defensive protocols are now in effect." Marcus realized with growing horror what that meant. The Academy's instructors and administrative staff were being mobilized for the defense. The cadets, hundreds of young aliens from every species in the Galactic Council, would be left essentially undefended. "Change of plans," he announced to his squad. "We're not staying here to be sitting targets." The other training squads had followed orders and returned to their dormitories. But Marcus led his cadets toward the Academy's command center, moving through corridors filled with running personnel and emergency equipment. "Sir, we're not authorized to be in this section," warned Zara, the Velaxian cadet. "I'm authorizing us," Marcus replied grimly. "If this facility falls, everyone dies. I'd rather have you ready to fight than helpless in a locked room." They reached the command center to find chaos. Officers from a dozen species were shouting orders in multiple languages. Holographic displays showed the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. The hostile fleet had broken through the outer defenses and was advancing on the Academy's position. Commander Vextar spotted Marcus and his cadets entering the restricted area. "Trainer Chen, get your students to safety immediately." "With respect, Commander, there is no safety," Marcus replied. "The hostiles don't leave survivors. If you're going to make a stand here, you'll need every available soldier." "They're cadets," Vextar roared. "Untrained children." Marcus gestured to his squad, which had automatically spread out to cover strategic positions around the command center. Without being ordered, the Aquarians had moved to technical stations where their precise movements would be most useful. The Corathons had positioned themselves near weapon controls. The Zephyrians were already analyzing tactical data faster than the adult officers. "Look at them, Commander. They're not acting like children." Before Vextar could respond, new alarms sounded. The hostile fleet had begun its final approach to the Academy. Long-range sensors showed landing craft launching from the enemy ships. The hostiles weren't planning to simply destroy the facility from orbit. They wanted to capture it intact. "Ground assault in 30 minutes, reported a Saurian officer. "Estimated enemy force, 2,000 combat units." The Academy's total military personnel numbered fewer than 300, and most of those were instructors rather than active soldiers. Against 2,000 hostile warriors, the defense was hopeless. Marcus stepped forward. "Commander, my cadets have trained specifically for mixed unit operations. They're not just 200 individual fighters. They're an integrated combat system unlike anything the hostiles have encountered." Vextar's 4 eyes fixed on the human trainer. Around them, the command center buzzed with desperate preparations for a doomed last stand. "What are you proposing?" "Let them fight. Not as backup or reserves, but as your primary ground defense force. They've been training for exactly this kind of situation." "Impossible," snapped the Velaxian defense coordinator. "Cadets cannot be expected to face veteran hostile warriors." But Krista, the young Zephyrian, had been analyzing the tactical displays with inhuman speed. "Sir, the hostile ground forces always use identical assault patterns. They rely on overwhelming force and standardized tactics. They've never faced truly adaptive opposition. Thrognak rumbled his agreement. My partner is correct. Hostile forces are effective because they know how each enemy species will respond. Korathans will charge directly. Philoxians will attempt flanking maneuvers. Zephyrians will establish defensive positions. But they have no tactical data for mixed species units. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched his cadets. They weren't panicking or waiting for orders. They were analyzing the situation and developing solutions using everything he had taught them about working together. They have a point, admitted the Aquarian tactical officer. Hostile forces have never encountered integrated multi-species tactics. Their combat algorithms wouldn't know how to respond. Commander Vextar was silent for a long moment, studying the displays that showed the approaching enemy force. His military training told him that using cadets in combat was unthinkable, but his tactical experience told him that conventional defenses would fail completely. If I allow this, he said finally, you understand that most of them will probably die. Marcus looked at his cadets who were listening intently to every word. They understand the risks, Commander, but they also understand that hiding won't save them. The hostiles don't take prisoners. A small Pixari named Pip stepped forward, her voice barely audible over the alarms but carrying clearly in the tense silence. Sir, we didn't choose Trainer Marcus because we wanted to hide behind others. We chose him because he taught us how to be strong together. Other cadets nodded agreement. The massive Korathans, the graceful Philoxians, the precise Zephyrians, all of them stood ready to face an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 years. Commander Vextar made his decision. Very well. Trainer Chin, your cadets are hereby activated for combat duty. God help us all. As the command center erupted into new activity, Marcus began issuing orders to his squad. But these weren't the rigid commands of traditional military hierarchy. Instead, he gave them the framework and let them adapt the details based on their unique abilities and partnerships. Aquarian Zephyrian teams handle electronic warfare and surveillance. Korathan Pixari teams for rapid deployment and infiltration. Philoxian Saurian teams for hit-and-run tactics. Everyone stays linked through the communication network we've practiced. The cadets moved with swift efficiency, each species contributing their strengths while covering for their partner's weaknesses. Watching them deploy, the adult officers began to understand what Marcus had created. This wasn't just a squad of young soldiers. It was something entirely new, a military force that could adapt and evolve in real time, using diversity as its greatest weapon. Outside the academy, the hostile landing craft touched down and began disgorging their standardized assault troops. They expected to face predictable opposition using conventional tactics. Instead, they were about to encounter something that would change the course of the war. 200 young aliens who had learned that their differences made them stronger, led by a human who understood that the greatest victories came not from force but from unity. The hostile forces hit the Academy's outer perimeter, exactly as their tactical doctrine predicted. 2,000 identical warriors in dark armor moved in perfect formation, their weapons firing in synchronized patterns. They had conquered 17 star systems using these exact same methods. Overwhelming defenders with superior numbers and flawless coordination. What they found at the Academy defied everything in their combat databases. Instead of traditional defensive lines, the hostiles encountered something that seemed like chaos but was actually deadly precision. Small mixed-species teams appeared and disappeared throughout the battlefield, striking from unexpected angles before vanishing again. Marcus coordinated the defense from the command center, but he wasn't giving detailed orders. Instead, he provided overall objectives and let his cadets adapt their tactics in real time. This was the culmination of everything they had trained for, the ability to think and fight as a unified organism while maintaining the unique strengths of each individual. Aquarian Team 7, incoming hostile squad at Sector 12 mine, Marcus announced over the communication network. He didn't need to specify tactics. The Aquarian-Zephyrian partnership had developed their own methods for dealing with enemy advances. The Aquarians used their translucent skin and natural stealth to scout enemy positions, while their Zephyrian partners calculated optimal ambush points with mathematical precision. Within minutes, the approaching hostile squad found themselves caught in a carefully planned trap. Precision energy blasts from concealed positions eliminated half their number, before they could even identify where the attacks were coming from. But the real innovation was what happened next. Instead of holding their position like traditional defenders, the Aquarian-Zephyrian team immediately relocated to support a nearby Korathan-Pixari group that was facing overwhelming odds. Thrognak and his tiny partner Pip had been assigned to eliminate a hostile heavy weapons emplacement. The standard approach would have been a direct assault, playing to Korathan's strengths. Instead, they had developed something completely new. Pip, small enough to move undetected through debris and wreckage, infiltrated the enemy position carrying specialized demolition charges. Meanwhile, Thrognak created a diversion by launching a seemingly reckless frontal attack that drew all enemy attention. The hostiles, following their programming, concentrated their fire on the obvious threat. They never saw the tiny Pixari placing charges on their equipment until it was too late. The explosion that followed didn't just destroy the weapons emplacement, it created a gap in the hostile lines that other teams immediately exploited. The Voloxian-Saurian partnerships moved like liquid, lightning through the battlefield. Zara and her Saurian partner had perfected a technique where the heat-sensing Saurian would identify enemy positions, while the quick-moving Voloxian delivered rapid strikes. But their real strength was adaptation. They changed their approach constantly based on battlefield conditions, something the rigid hostile forces couldn't predict or counter. Commander Vextar watched the battle unfold from the command center, his 4 eyes wide with amazement. "This is impossible," he muttered. "They're outnumbered 10-1, but they're actually winning." The tactical displays showed something unprecedented in modern warfare. The hostile forces, despite their overwhelming numerical advantage, were being systematically dismantled by an enemy they couldn't understand. Every time they adapted to one tactic, the defenders shifted to something completely different. "Sir," reported the Aquarian tactical officer, "hostile forces are showing signs of confusion. Their standard response algorithms aren't functioning properly." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's because they're programmed to fight individual species with predictable tactics. They've never encountered truly integrated multi-species combat." On the battlefield, the cadets were demonstrating exactly what he meant. A group of hostiles had cornered a Zephyrian team in a damaged building. Standard doctrine would have called for reinforcements to break the siege. Instead, an Aquarian team approached through the building's water systems. A Pixari team came through ventilation shafts, and a Korathan team prepared a direct assault. The coordinated attack hit from 4 directions simultaneously. The hostiles, programmed to respond to threats sequentially, couldn't process multiple attack vectors happening at exactly the same moment. By the time their tactical systems finished analyzing the situation, half their number was already eliminated. But the real breakthrough came when Krista, the young Zephyrian who had been analyzing hostile patterns, made a crucial discovery. "Trainer Marcus," she announced over the communication network, "I've identified a weakness in their coordination system. Hostile units communicate through quantum-encrypted frequencies, but they're using a standardized protocol. If we can disrupt their communications at specific intervals, we can create cascading failures in their tactical network." Marcus felt a surge of pride. This was exactly the kind of innovative thinking he had hoped to develop. "Can you implement the disruption?" "Affirmative, but I'll need assistance from multiple teams. The disruption requires precise timing across 17 different frequency bands simultaneously." What followed was perhaps the most complex military operation ever attempted by cadets. Krista coordinated with Zephyrian teams throughout the battlefield, each one responsible for disrupting specific communication frequencies. But the timing had to be perfect. If they were off by even a few milliseconds, the hostiles would detect the attack and adapt their protocols. Aquarian teams provided reconnaissance to identify hostile communication nodes. Voloxian teams ensured rapid movement between positions. Korathan teams protected the technical specialists while they worked. Pixari teams infiltrated enemy formations to place disruption devices. Saurian teams used their heat vision to track enemy movements and predict optimal timing. Every species contributed their unique abilities to a plan that would have been impossible for any single species military force to execute. "All teams ready," Krista announced, initiating communication disruption in 3, 2, 1, execute. Across the battlefield, the effect was immediate and devastating. Hostile forces that had moved with perfect coordination suddenly found themselves operating in isolation. Their tactical algorithms, designed for networked operations, began producing conflicting orders. Units started firing on each other, mistaking disconnected allies for enemies. But Marcus's cadets, who had trained to operate both independently and as part of integrated teams, maintained perfect coordination even as the enemy fell into chaos. "Now," Marcus announced, "all teams general advance." And this. What followed wasn't a battle so much as a demonstration of what happened when rigid doctrine met adaptive creativity. The hostile forces, stripped of their coordination and facing tactics they couldn't comprehend, began a full retreat toward their landing craft. But even the retreat revealed the superiority of the cadets' training. Instead of pursuing in a straight line, the mixed species teams used coordinated flanking movements to cut off escape routes. They didn't just defeat the enemy, they captured valuable prisoners and intelligence that had eluded galactic military forces for 3 years. As the last hostile transport fled the system, the Academy's communication center erupted in cheers. 200 cadets had accomplished what veteran military forces had failed to do. They had not only defeated a hostile invasion force but had done so with minimal casualties on their own side. "Commander," Vextar approached Marcus as the victory reports came in. "Human," he said, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "What you have created here will change the nature of warfare itself." Marcus looked out at his celebrating cadets, who were helping wounded teammates regardless of species, sharing supplies across group boundaries, and already analyzing the battle to improve their tactics for next time. "We didn't create anything new, Commander," he replied. "We just remembered something very old, that differences are strengths, not weaknesses, and that understanding each other is the foundation of all true victory." The hostile fleet, meanwhile, transmitted its battle data back to their command networks. For the first time in their species' history, they had encountered an enemy that defied all their tactical models. The implications would ripple through their civilization for years to come, but that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, 200 young aliens from 12 different species had proven that the future belonged not to any single race, but to those wise enough to embrace the strength that came from unity in diversity. Word of the Academy battle spread across the galaxy within days. For the first time since the hostile threat emerged, a military force had not only defeated them, but had captured prisoners and intelligence. The victory recording showed something that challenged every assumption about modern warfare. 200 cadets, fighting with coordination that seemed almost telepathic. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from all 12 species gathered to analyze what had happened and determine how to replicate it. But what they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about military organization. Marcus found himself standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, trying to explain concepts that seemed obvious to him, but revolutionary to them. "The key," he said, addressing the assembled dignitaries, "is not to eliminate differences between soldiers, but to celebrate them. Each species brings unique capabilities to combat situations. The mistake has been trying to force everyone to fight the same way." The Karathan military representative, a general with twice Commander Vextar's bulk, slammed one of his 4 fists on the council table. "Nonsense. Military effectiveness requires standardization, discipline, uniform training. What you've described is chaos masquerading as strategy." "Is it?" Marcus activated a holographic display showing the battle analysis. "Your forces have faced the hostiles 17 times in the past 3 years. Every encounter followed the same pattern. Initial resistance, tactical stalemate, eventual retreat or defeat. The hostiles won because they could predict exactly how each species would respond to any given situation." He changed the display to show the Academy battle. "My cadets won because they were unpredictable. Not chaotic, unpredictable. There's a crucial difference." The Zephyrian counselor, her crystalline body chiming with agitation, spoke up. "But the coordination requirements must be enormous. How do you prevent communication breakdowns between such diverse combat units?" Before Marcus could answer, Krista stepped forward from the group of cadets who had been invited to demonstrate their methods. "Honored Counselor, we don't prevent communication breakdowns, we plan for them. Each partnership is trained to operate independently when necessary, while maintaining connection to the larger unit objective." Thrognak nodded agreement. "My Pixari partner and I can complete our mission even if we lose contact with command." But because we understand how our mission fits into the larger strategy, we can adapt our methods to support other teams automatically. The demonstration that followed left the council members speechless. Marcus's cadets performed a complex tactical exercise where different species groups had to coordinate responses to multiple simultaneous threats. But instead of relying on centralized command, they operated like a living organism, each part responding to local conditions while maintaining overall coherence. When communications were deliberately cut between teams, they didn't fall apart. Instead, they seamlessly adapted their coordination methods, using everything from hand signals to chemical markers to maintain unit cohesion. Impossible, whispered the Veloxian defense minister. This level of coordination should take decades to develop. Zara, who had been partnered with a methodical Saurian throughout training, stepped forward. Respectfully, Minister, it does take decades if you're trying to train individuals to suppress their natural instincts. But it takes only weeks if you're training them to enhance each other's natural abilities. The political implications were staggering. For centuries, each species had maintained separate military forces, convinced that their own methods were superior. The idea of integrated multi-species units challenged fundamental assumptions about governance, sovereignty, and military independence. The Aquarian representative raised a concern that others were thinking but hadn't voiced. This system requires an extraordinary level of trust between species. What happens when political tensions arise? Can Corathans really rely on Veloxians in combat if their governments are in dispute? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Political alliances in the galaxy were fragile things, constantly shifting based on economic interests and territorial disputes. Marcus looked at his cadets, who had formed their usual mixed-species discussion circle, despite being in the most formal political setting in the galaxy. "Show them," he said simply. What happened next would be remembered as one of the most significant moments in galactic political history. The cadets began sharing personal stories, not about their species or their homeworlds, but about each other. Thrognak spoke about how Pip had saved his life during the hostile battle, using her size advantage to reach him when he was trapped under debris. Pip talked about how Thrognak had spent hours learning to communicate in her species, complex gesture language so they could coordinate silently. Zara described how her Saurian partner had taught her patience and careful observation, qualities that went against every Veloxian instinct, but had made her a better warrior. The Saurian spoke about how Zara had helped her overcome her species' natural caution, teaching her when quick action was more valuable than careful planning. One by one, every cadet shared similar stories. Not tales of species cooperation, but accounts of personal friendships that transcended biology and culture. They had learned to see past scales, fur, crystals, and flesh to the individuals beneath. "This is what we created," Marcus said, as the stories concluded. "Not just military efficiency, but genuine bonds between people who might otherwise see each other as aliens. When you trust someone with your life repeatedly, political boundaries become irrelevant." The council fell silent as they absorbed the implications. These young beings weren't just effective soldiers. They were living proof that the barriers between species could be overcome through understanding and shared experience. But not everyone was convinced. The Saurian military commander, whose species had the longest tradition of isolation, stood up. "This is all very touching, but what happens when these cadets return to their homeworlds? Will they maintain loyalty to their own species, or will their allegiances become confused?" The question struck at the heart of the entire system. Multi-species cooperation was one thing, but multi-species loyalty could be seen as treason. Pip, the tiny Pixari who had been so crucial in the battle, spoke up in her quiet voice. "Sir, learning to trust other species didn't make me less Pixari. It made me more than just Pixari. I'm still loyal to my homeworld, but now I'm also loyal to something bigger." "And what is that?" the Saurian commander demanded. "The idea that we're all stronger together than we could ever be apart." The simple statement from such a small being carried enormous weight. Around the circle, cadets from 12 different species nodded agreement. They hadn't lost their cultural identities, they had expanded them. But as the council session continued, it became clear that implementing Marcus's methods galaxy-wide would face enormous challenges. Military traditions went back millennia. Political structures were built around species-based governance. Economic systems assumed competition rather than cooperation between different worlds. Marcus found himself fielding increasingly hostile questions from representatives who saw the multi-species training system as a threat to their authority. If young aliens could learn to trust and work with other species so easily, what did that say about the political barriers that kept the galaxy divided? The session ended without resolution, but with a mandate for further study. Marcus's cadets would be observed and tested. Their methods would be analyzed and debated. Pilot programs might be established. But as they left the council chambers, Marcus realized that the real battle was just beginning. They had proven that diversity could be a military strength. Now they would have to prove that it could be a political one as well. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see whether the future belonged to division or unity. The answer might well determine whether civilization could survive the challenges that lay ahead. Word of the Academy battle spread across the galaxy within days. For the first time since the hostile threat emerged, a military force had not only defeated them but had captured prisoners and intelligence. The victory recording showed something that challenged every assumption about modern warfare. 200 cadets, fighting with coordination that seemed almost telepathic. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from all 12 species gathered to analyze what had happened and determine how to replicate it. But what they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about military organization. Marcus found himself standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, trying to explain concepts that seemed obvious to him but revolutionary to them. The key, he said, addressing the assembled dignitaries, is not to eliminate differences between soldiers but to celebrate them. Each species brings unique capabilities to combat situations. The mistake has been trying to force everyone to fight the same way. The Corathan military representative, a general with twice Commander Vextar's bulk, slammed one of his 4 fists on the council table. Nonsense. Military effectiveness requires standardization, discipline, uniform training. What you've described is chaos masquerading as strategy. Is it? Marcus activated a holographic display showing the battle analysis. Your forces have faced the hostiles 17 times in the past 3 years. Every encounter followed the same pattern. Initial resistance, tactical stalemate, eventual retreat or defeat. The hostiles won because they could predict exactly how each species would respond to any given situation. He changed the display to show the Academy battle. My cadets won because they were unpredictable. Not chaotic, unpredictable. There's a crucial difference. The Zephyrian counselor, her crystalline body chiming with agitation, spoke up. But the coordination requirements must be enormous. How do you prevent communication breakdowns between such diverse combat units? Before Marcus could answer, Krista stepped forward from the group of cadets who had been invited to demonstrate their methods. Honored counselor, we don't prevent communication breakdowns, we plan for them. Each partnership is trained to operate independently when necessary, while maintaining connection to the larger unit objective. Thrognak nodded agreement. My Pixari partner and I can complete our mission even if we lose contact with command. But because we understand how our mission fits into the larger strategy, we can adapt our methods to support other teams automatically. The demonstration that followed left the council members speechless. Marcus's cadets performed a complex tactical exercise where different species groups had to coordinate responses to multiple simultaneous threats. But instead of relying on centralized command, they operated like a living organism, each part responding to local conditions while maintaining overall coherence. When communications were deliberately cut between teams, they didn't fall apart. Instead, they seamlessly adapted their coordination methods, using everything from hand signals to chemical markers, to maintain unit cohesion. Impossible, whispered the Veloxian defense minister. This level of coordination should take decades to develop. Zara, who had been partnered with a methodical Saurian throughout training, stepped forward. Respectfully, Minister, it does take decades if you're trying to train individuals to suppress their natural instincts. But it takes only weeks if you're training them to enhance each other's natural abilities. The political implications were staggering. For centuries, each species had maintained separate military forces, convinced that their own methods were superior. The idea of integrated multi-species units challenged fundamental assumptions about governance, sovereignty, and military independence. The Aquarian representative raised a concern that others were thinking but hadn't voiced. This system requires an extraordinary level of trust between species. What happens when political tensions arise? Can Corathans really rely on Veloxians in combat if their governments are in dispute? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Political alliances in the galaxy were fragile things, constantly shifting based on economic interests and territorial disputes. Marcus looked at his cadets, who had formed their usual mixed-species discussion circle, despite being in the most formal political setting in the galaxy. "Show them," he said simply. What happened next would be remembered as one of the most significant moments in galactic political history. The cadets began sharing personal stories, not about their species or their homeworlds, but about each other. Thrognak spoke about how Pip had saved his life during the hostile battle, using her size advantage to reach him when he was trapped under debris. Pip talked about how Thrognak had spent hours learning to communicate in her species, complex gesture language so they could coordinate silently. Zara described how her Saurian partner had taught her patience and careful observation, qualities that went against every Veloxian instinct but had made her a better warrior. The Saurian spoke about how Zara had helped her overcome her species' natural caution, teaching her when quick action was more valuable than careful planning. One by one, every cadet shared similar stories. Not tales of species cooperation, but accounts of personal friendships that transcended biology and culture. They had learned to see past scales, fur, crystals, and flesh to the individuals beneath. "This is what we created," Marcus said as the stories concluded. "Not just military efficiency, but genuine bonds between people who might otherwise see each other as aliens. When you trust someone with your life repeatedly, political boundaries become irrelevant." The council fell silent as they absorbed the implications. These young beings weren't just effective soldiers. They were living proof that the barriers between species could be overcome through understanding and shared experience. But not everyone was convinced. The Saurian military commander, whose species had the longest tradition of isolation, stood up. "This is all very touching, but what happens when these cadets return to their homeworlds? Will they maintain loyalty to their own species, or will their allegiances become confused?" The question struck at the heart of the entire system. Multi-species cooperation was one thing, but multi-species loyalty could be seen as treason. Pip, the tiny Pixari who had been so crucial in the battle, spoke up in her quiet voice. "Sir, learning to trust other species didn't make me less Pixari. It made me more than just Pixari. I'm still loyal to my homeworld, but now I'm also loyal to something bigger." "And what is that?" the Saurian commander demanded. "The idea that we're all stronger together than we could ever be apart." The simple statement from such a small being carried enormous weight. Around the circle, cadets from 12 different species nodded agreement. They hadn't lost their cultural identities, they had expanded them. But as the council session continued, it became clear that implementing Marcus's methods galaxy-wide would face enormous challenges. Military traditions went back millennia. Political structures were built around species-based governance. Economic systems assumed competition rather than cooperation between different worlds. Marcus found himself fielding increasingly hostile questions from representatives who saw the multi-species training system as a threat to their authority. If young aliens could learn to trust and work with other species so easily, what did that say about the political barriers that kept the galaxy divided? The session ended without resolution, but with a mandate for further study. Marcus's cadets would be observed and tested. Their methods would be analyzed and debated. Pilot programs might be established, but as they left the council chambers, Marcus realized that the real battle was just beginning. They had proven that diversity could be a military strength. Now they would have to prove that it could be a political one as well. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see whether the future belonged to division or unity. The answer might well determine whether civilization could survive the challenges that lay ahead.